All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. It is the third Saturday of the month, which means that we are here to have a study group with Sky Matsuhashi. I'm happy to be joined by Sky. Every month, Rec Poker Premium members, we get an extended length series of training videos from Sky and the Poker Forge. It's available in our membership content archive. That comes out on the first Saturday of the month. And then we get a couple weeks to review the material, talk about it in the forums, do some of the exercises, because, active learning is what Sky is all about. So if we're not doing the exercises, we're not really getting the most out of it. But now it's the third Saturday of the month, and it's time to get together, talk about some of our work in that area, and ask the man himself for some tips on how to get through it. So this one was all about assigning preflop ranges. It's the most important thing that any of us do because it's the foundation of how we refine our ranges post-flop. And that's what poker is all about, making assumptions about our opponents, allowing those assumptions to influence the ranges that they're going to play, and then thoughtfully and strategically reducing that range street by street, action by action. Every action they take, you should be removing hands from their range. So first of all, does anyone have any questions for Sky, or Sky, would you like to just sort of talk about the primacy of this activity when we're talking about strategic poker play?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to answer questions as we go, of course, from anybody about anything. But the key thing with just like you had said, putting your opponent on that pre-flop range allows you to really start to think about what your opponent is doing. You start playing the player when you assign that range. When all you think is, oh, I got king 10 suited, the flop is king high, I should value bet. If that's the extent of your thinking, you don't think about who your opponent is, what their range is, what they could call with, what they might raise you with, then you are not playing optimal poker, right? You're not playing the player. You're not putting enough thought into your decisions.
Yeah. That's it. And it truly is the foundation. It truly is. And it's something that, none of us are intentional enough about while we're playing. And it's another one of those things that we're all probably better at when other people are playing or when we're reviewing our hands. There's something about being in the moment that makes it more difficult to do that. Maybe that's a good place to start, Sky, because I think intellectually we all kind of understand the process of assigning ranges and then reducing them. Do you have any thoughts or tips on how we can, while we're actually playing, take that abstract learning and do it? Because I think that's a challenge for a lot of players to actually go through that process in real time.
Mm-hmm. So there's two different ways. First off, you're playing live right now in Vegas, right? Live cash games and everything. So you can't have a set of ranges in front of you. You have to do your best to kind of visualize what their range looks like. And if you look at a Flopzilla graph, most ranges are shaped like an arrow, and they're thick up top, where all the broadways are, and they get down thick through the middle where the suited connectors are. If you could visualize what the range looks like, depending on the pre-flop play, right? You just visualize that. That's going to help you. And if you start naming hands just in your head, well, he called my open raise. I don't think he calls with anything worse than 7-6. So it's 7-6 suited better. Probably has every pocket pair, but not aces and kings because he'd re-raise me. If you just run through different hands in your head as a live player, that's going to help you as well. Just think about their range. And then when that king high flop comes, now you think about what he could have, how it interacts with the flop, and then you make your decisions from there. But the big thing about that, especially for a live player, is just practice. You got to practice and practice just doing that. When you exit the hand, you folded your 9-deuce offsuit, right? But this guy open raised, and then this guy in the big blind called. What is that big blind player calling? Because now you're not involved in the hand. You have nothing to risk, nothing to worry about. Now you have all the brain space in the world to think about what is he calling with, what is he open raising with, and you can test yourself and practice putting people on ranges. And then occasionally you get lucky enough and you get to see showdown. I put him on 7-6 suited or a suited connector from the start. It makes sense that he had that, right? So that's what you want to do in live games. Every opportunity, whether you're involved or not, put them on the range, try to visualize it. Now, what you could do off the felt is study and do hand reading. So if you're strictly a live player, hopefully you're taking notes on interesting hands, right? And you can put those hands through Flopzilla, assign a range on your opponent based on their player type, their pre-flop actions, their position, their stack size, all that stuff. And then you force yourself to do it over and over again off the felt during your 20, 30-minute study sessions. And then that is just going to train you. Hopefully, the idea is that it trains you to start doing it in game while you're actually playing. And if you're an online player, it's so much easier to put people on ranges. In the Poker Forge, I give people what I call range cheat sheets. So hold on one second.
Yep. This guy has so many great little tools and resources. It's amazing. He's the man for that kind of stuff.
They're not actually on my desk. I had to go into the file, but like, for example, this is a cheat sheet that I made. You could see it right here. 2-bet calling ranges cheat sheet, 10, 14, 20, 23%. So if you have this in front of you while you're playing, you open raise, somebody calls in the big blind, take a look at this. I think this is his calling range. Bam, it's visualized right here. When that board comes, king, 9, deuce, look at the range. He has a few kings, but not too many. My pocket pair of aces, I could potentially be betting 3 streets for value or whatever the case might be, right? But you can have this in front of you online as you play. And then hopefully if you're like an online player and a live player, practicing using this while you're playing online, that'll help inform your decision making, inform your thought process during those live sessions as well.
Yeah, I'm a visual learner, so for me, being able to see that, hey, dog tax, there we go, hello. Being able to see it and visualize it, that's made it much easier for me to be able to then proceed past that point, because I kind of, it's just easier for me to see, to think about it when I see it like that. And that really is something that, I mean, I love this cheat sheet because if you can just give yourself that starting point, then it really it really helps. Every street gets easier because it's just by definition, unless everybody checks all the time, you're going to get fewer and fewer combos every street, every action. So that does help a lot. Just kind of like set the stage and tell you what you're starting with. And Sky, I like the way that you like break it out into little, because it can be overwhelming to think about it all at once. So Sky has this way of just let's just put these hands in some kind of buckets and think about, okay, what's the lowest pocket pair he's going to play? What's the lowest Broadway he's going to play? What's the lowest ace, whether it's suited or not? What's the lowest suited hand by rank and by kicker? And then what's the lowest offsuit hand? And it just, I mean, listen, this should be a comprehensive process. So you have to go through each one of these sort of like types of hands, but just by breaking it out like that, it makes it a lot easier to do it yourself as opposed to trying to like create in your mind that same arrow with all the in the Equilab chart or in the Flopzilla chart. It's just yeah right. So break it down into individual pieces and move it along like that.
Yeah, individual hand categories.
Yeah, hand categories. That's right. And that's also, that's going to make it helpful for you when you're thinking about that later in the hand, because pocket pairs are going to perform differently than suited connectors or aces on various streets, on various runouts. So if you're already thinking about like, okay, he's got this suited ace, he's got this pocket pair, he's got this Broadway, that is actually it's just going to help you already think about that kind of stuff. Kevin, did you have a question?
No, just a couple things, right? So that same piece that you're reading off, he's got a lot of good content, right? We all know that. And I've been working more on my game. And the problem that I run into, right, is that initial question. The initial question is, what are they doing this with, right? Which is one of your big things. And I actually, when I'm sitting online, right, I actually pull a blank, right, on what would they be doing for the group of people we play with, right? Because they're very diverse in how they play. And I find that I fall back to my own ranges, right? Trying to give me just a base, right? What would he be doing this with? Yep, this is a leg, right? And then I try to figure out maybe his range. What is he going to be opening this with based off of his VPIP and PFR, right? Okay, so where he's in middle position. He opened, right? He didn't continue bet, right? Sometimes there are a lot of pieces in that. I've really been trying to work through your like you said, bringing it back, the hand reading, right? That's the big piece that I know I'm missing, right? So it's just hard for me to put it all together in that moment when you're at the table trying to say, what would the lowest pair be doing this with? The next thing you know, you're up to, and you've got to make some type of decision if you're going to raise or fold or call. So that's something that I struggle quite a bit with, is actually putting them on a range, right? So
For sure. And the way to really, I don't know, train that is to do hand reading exercises off the felt and just take hands where you're especially like start with the common spots, right? You probably want to be the open raiser more than the caller. So if you're going to put your opponent on ranges and practice ranging them, you should be ranging and thinking about the 2-bet calling ranges as opposed to the 2-betting ranges. Like 2-betting, that's what you're doing. You're the open raiser. You're going for bread and butter. You're concerned with that caller. What is his range? So just focus on the calling ranges over and over again. But then do the full hand reading exercise, right? Assign that range pre-flop, but then take it through the streets. And I always recommend to my students do 1 or 2 exercises per day. Once you get good at it and real quick with the software and you understand the process, you can really do any hand reading exercise in between 3 to 5 minutes, depending on the action, the player type and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's off the felt work, continuing to do it. And then like utilizing this, like I said, while you're playing. And even if you don't really mentally narrow the range through the streets, as long as you open raise in the cutoff, the big blind calls before you even see the flop, take your hand off the mouse. I think this is his range. Put your finger on it. Now look at the board and then now make your decisions based on that, like give yourself some time. When you keep your hand on your mouse, it's so easy to just click, click, click. And you're not giving as much thought to your opponents, their actions, their ranges, all that stuff.
Yeah. Totally. I used to make myself, I had a 3 count. I had to count to 3 before I took any action. And I would use that time to think about like, what's the mistake that I'm likely to make here? And how can I just avoid that mistake? Kevin, I think part of it's just doing it more. So whether that's by playing, but if you're playing without ranging people, you're not really practicing, right? You're just kind of like getting reps at the table, which isn't really the same thing. Sky's got this amazing video course, 66 Days of Hand Ranging, which is free if you go to his YouTube channel, Smart Poker Study. You got to do this every day for a while. You got to stick with it, and you got to go through this process every day for a long time. And if you do that, you're going to internalize it. You're going to use that. You're going to retain that muscle memory. And ultimately, the goal is to not be actively thinking about it as much at the table while you're playing, and to just kind of like, eventually the goal is for your brain to just do a lot of this stuff naturally. And then you can just kind of just start trusting your gut and focusing on the particular parts of the range that you're trying to contort with your sizing and stuff like that. So, but practice makes perfect, man. And it's not, practice isn't sexy, but it sure gets the job done. So I can't say that enough. The one thing that I had some success with when I was practicing hand ranging was taking hands from my own database, like 6 months or a year ago, and adjusting the settings so that I couldn't see what anyone's cards were. And then even in my own hands, just ranging myself, because I know what my opening ranges are, my calling ranges are. And so if I review a hand where I don't see my whole cards, I can kind of range myself action by action, street by street. And that was a really good way for me to get used to doing that to other people. Because I think part of the problem that I think you're talking about, Kevin, is that how do we even just assign a range in the first place? Like, how do we even just like put them on a range? And I think what a lot of people do, which is correct, is to say, well, that's what I would do in their spot. So this is the range that I'm thinking to put them on. But ultimately, and I'm sure Sky will agree, it's not that important to get that opening range perfect. You're not going to get it perfect. Don't worry about perfect. Oh boy, it hurts me to say that. I like things to be perfect, but what really matters is that it's pretty close, and that you are sticking with it, and that you just like don't add hands back into the range on future streets, and just stick to the plan, man. And do the exercise. And even if your assumption's a little off at the beginning, it's got some hands in it that shouldn't be there, or it's missing a couple hands, that's not going to come up often enough to be a real problem for you. You just got to keep practicing perfect, right? That's the only way to be perfect. Practice doesn't make perfect. Only perfect practice makes perfect. So do the exercises. And that one of the things that Sky says all the time, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. But the second best time is right now. So I know I've got all these years of playing poker where I was not learning as effectively as I could be, mostly because I was like trying to do it alone. But it's never too late to start getting better. and you've got every day you've got your whole poker career in front of you. So put in some time. Just do it. I don't say this often, but hand ranging exercises are probably the most valuable time you can spend studying right now, because you do it on every single hand, and I just think it's crucially important to get better at this. All right, I had a couple other notes here I wanted to get into. Let me pull this up here. And okay, so Kevin, this might also be helpful. Sky talks about sort of the different information, the different factors that are available to you. And it can be kind of paralyzing for me at the table sometimes when I'm like, what should I even be thinking about in this spot? Like, what are the factors that are relevant to me? And if you watch the video, Sky goes over a lot of them. But whether you're live or online, you should be thinking about these things. Player type, the tendencies of that type or tendencies of the player pool, or if you have notes on that individual, of course. I mean, stack sizes, the size of the pot, position, those are going to be relevant on every street of every hand. So, some of the foundational stuff, like just, are you perfectly confident that you know what your stack is, the size of the pot, the stack size of your villains? Again, not to be perfectly accurate, but just to have a sense of that, because what you're really trying to do is just make better assumptions about the range. That's what poker is, just making better assumptions about the range and then wagering on whether you're right or not. Right? You did some good hand examples here, but sorry, I'm just working with my little tablet here.
Well, while you're doing that, one of the things too that's key to think about is you had mentioned something just a little bit ago. There's so much information, we can get bogged down by it or overwhelmed by it. Especially when you're doing hand reading exercises off the felt, you have all the time in the world to really think through. And if you're an online player, one of the key things to look at is your opponent, especially if you have 100 or more hands on your opponent, you have plenty of stats, plenty of information. One of the key things to look at is their specific pre-flop play in the position that they're in. So you look at all their calling percentages, for example, they call differently in the MP, the cutoff, the button, the small blind, and especially the big blind, right? Look at that percentage and then build a range that kind of makes sense around that percentage. And then ask yourself, okay, this player is a tag, lag, a fish, a nit. Is he really going to call with those hands? And then add and subtract various hands in the range that just makes sense to you. Now, like a good idea, and both of you mentioned it, Kevin and Jim, start with your own ranges. Like if you have no idea, it's the first time ever, what would I call here? I don't care that he's a fish or a loose aggressive player. I would call in the big blind with blank. Great, that's the range you start with. Go ahead, start with that. Do your hand reading exercise. Over time, you'll start to learn, wait a second, I assigned the worst suited gapper as 10-8 suited, but this fish called with 6-4 suited? Now that's going to inform you later on, 6-4 suited might be the worst suited gapper. Then you build everything else around that. If he calls with 6-4 suited, probably calls with 5-4 suited. Maybe he calls with king-4 suited as well, like the other 4 hands, So go ahead and those are just some tips to help you first start assigning ranges. And like Jim had said, it doesn't matter if you make mistakes. Over time, as you do this more and more, you'll learn. Well, the goal is to learn from your mistakes, right? If you keep making the same mistake over and over again, you never put 6-4 suited in the fish's range, and 3 different fish have it at 3 different times, then you're not learning from your mistakes. But the goal is just do it, and you'll naturally learn and progress.
And I want to jump off on that for a second, because I think that is a problem for recreational players like us. We're like, well, he just can't have done that. He can't have shown up with that. And then he does, and then later we're like, oh, okay, well, he's not going to do that again, because now I saw him go to showdown. I was like, don't out level yourself. Just they play the ranges they play. So sometimes it's like they just like playing pots in position. They're going to call with
anything suited
of hands. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. But you're doing yourself a disservice if you then say, okay, well, an optimal calling range is 8% here, so I'm going to put him on that, and then play as though he has an 8% calling range. What you need to do, what we all need to do better and better, is just make those assumptions and make those assumptions better. So And this is a great. I play mostly online, so for me, the HUD it's a great tool. It's also probably a bit of a crutch for me because I rely on it so heavily. But one thing that's great about it is the notes that you can take in the HUD note tracker if you're using Poker Tracker 4. And the thing in this particular case, what's great about that is that you can find those outlier hands, those 6-4 suited that you wouldn't normally put in someone's range. And then you can extrapolate from that a much bigger part of their range. Like if that's the bottom of it, I would have said that like Jack 9 suited was the bottom of the range here. But when they show up with 6-4, you can just like fill in all the rest of those hands there. And that can be really valuable. So it's not that valuable to get to see someone show down a hand that's like right in the middle of the range that you thought they'd be playing anyway. But if it's near the edge, either the top or the bottom of that range, then do extrapolate from that. Make a note, write it down. It might show up in your HUD, but if you're playing live, make a note or make a mental note, and just make sure to include all the hands that come up from there as well. So, Sky, did you have something there?
Yeah, the thing that you just said about making a mental note while playing live, that never works for me. That's just me personally. I will not remember if I'm playing with Kevin and he sits over there across the table from me and he shows down the 6-4. 15 minutes later, I'm probably going to forget that, just knowing me, right? So I always have on my phone, if I'm playing live, I have Evernote. I'll just, I have like a seat 1 through 9, and I'll put, if I'm on seat 7, I'll put hero right there on seat 7. And when Kevin over there in seat 4 shows down 6-4 suited, I'll type in next to his name, called preflop 6-4 suited, or whatever note to help me remember that, because for me, mental notes never work. I do not remember them. I need to physically write something or type on my phone something down.
Yeah. And you gotta, do what works for you, right? I'm the same way, Sky. Whenever I enter a tournament, a live tournament, I always write down, seats 1 through 9. I just call myself me because it's shorter.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I like.
I say hero, but hero.
Yes, this guy. And then I don't write down like every action that people take, but I just write down the outliers because I'm just going to assume that they're going to make routine plays. And so you don't write down the routine information. You just write down when they break with that or when they do something outside of the routine. And then that helps you kind of put them in a bucket. So what are some ways that you, Sky, what are some ways that you see action at the table and then decide, okay, this player is in this bucket. This player is a loose aggressive. This player is a tag. This player is a tight passive. I think recreational players like us, we like to have like easy to follow little rules for stuff like that. And I know it's not actually that easy, but are there any like heuristics when it comes to that kind of thing that help you put people in those buckets?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing, because every hand sees the pre-flop stage, that's where my focus begins when I sit down at a new table, live or online. I'm always thinking about that. And as soon as somebody limps into the pot, fish, 100% fish. If somebody buys in for only 40 big blinds, fish. Right away, for sure. If somebody posts instead of waiting for the big blind, especially if they post under the gun, like who posts one big blind under the gun in the third worst position? It's normally a fish. So I'm looking. So those are the 3 things that categorize right away as a fish. Now they might do that purposely to trick you, right? Like, oh, I got some. I do these things because Sky says he sees these and thinks of them as fish. So people might come in and try to, use that against me. But for the most part, if somebody limps, short stacks, posts out of the blinds, they're a fish. Those 3 things, like 99% of the time they are. The other things you're looking for are 3 bets. People love open raising. They come in for open raises all the time. But those 3 bets automatically indicate a loose aggressive or a tight aggressive player. Now, if they not okay in the beginning,
and Scott, you just mean like 3 bets at all, right? Simply the presence of 3 bets, right?
In when you first sit down at a table, first 20 or 30 hands, the first 3 bet you see on somebody, that's probably indicating a tight aggressive or a loose aggressive. If you see a second and a third, then definitely tight aggressive or loose aggressive player. But if you've been at the table for 50 hands and somebody who hasn't played much comes in for a 3 bet, he's got a really strong hand. He's a nit player, right? So 3 betting can go either way. But for the most part, if somebody makes multiple 3 bets in 2 or 3 orbits, you know that they're a loose aggressive player. So that's another pre-flop action. Another thing is, if somebody can fold in the blinds versus just a 2 or 2.5 big blind open raise, they're a tight player. Whether they're tight aggressive or a nit, either way, they're just tight, because a lot of the fish, a lot of loose aggressive players, you make it 2.5. Oh, it's only 1.5 more. I'll call with Jack 7 suited. I'll call with 7-4 suited, 8-9 offsuit, right? They'll make those looser calls, but the tighter players will fold all of those hands because they don't want to give this in position player position with a weak hand. So those are some of the pre-flop things that right away clue me into what type of player I'm up against. Now, post-flop, you're looking for c-bets, you're looking for checks, you're looking for check calls. If you're lucky enough to get to showdown and you see somebody check called 3 streets or 2 streets, flop and turn with just a gut shot, and then on the river, they come out betting when they hit their gut shot, you know that that's a fishy player, can't fold any draws, but he's going to let you know when he catches his hand. And you know, he's going to basically plays his hands face up. Or if you see somebody c-bet bluffing flop, turn, and river, you know that they're a loose aggressive or maybe tight aggressive player, but they're capable of doing those bluffs, right? So you just want to pay attention to those post-flop actions. In general, bets and raises are an aggressive player. Checks and calls are the more passive players in general there. But you combine those post-flop plays with what you know about them pre-flop to give you a better, bigger overall picture of that player. And then once you realize what kind of player they are, you start playing based on, or you start playing against their player type. And then over time, you just start to notice more of their tendencies if you're paying attention. But initially, looking pre-flop, that's the player type. I'm going to play against them as if they are that player type until I learn more information later on.
Yep. And we talk about Flopzilla a lot here. Flopzilla costs about $30 one time, and you own it for life. It is a phenomenal program. We don't have any affiliation with them, so we're not pitching this for any reason other than it's just a fantastic program. But go, if you don't own it, I really do. It's one of the most valuable tools you can get when it comes to practicing this kind of thing. But if you'd prefer, there's a great program called Equilab, which will it's free if you go to pokerstrategy.com, and it'll help you. It'll help you with the front end of this, which is just visualizing that range and being able to kind of like just reduce the combos as you go through. It's not as good a tool for this because Flopzilla really is the best at range analysis. Just a quick show of hands of the members here in the chat. Who owns Equilab, the free software? Just put your hands up. Yep. Okay. So Doug and Jamel, and who owns Flopzilla? Anybody else? Anyone else? All right, Doug and Jamel, you guys got to get this, man, because I'm not saying go spend the $30 on Flopzilla, but get Equilab, because I guarantee you, just the time that you spend with the program is going to help you internalize that image of that little arrow, that range, and that I can't tell you how helpful that's been to me at the table. And I've put honestly, I've probably put thousands of hours into those 2 programs over the last 15 or 20 years or whatever it is, and it's really just helped train my brain so that when I'm at the tables, I've got some bandwidth to think about some of this other more esoteric stuff. So really, honestly, as soon as we're finished here, go to pokerstrategy.com and download the free Equilab, because it'll help you a lot when it comes to just internalizing this. And then your brain's going to have better data to be working with while you're making those decisions. So, and it also obviously makes it a lot easier to follow along with Sky's videos. And that is crucial. So another free, we talked about the 66 days of hand ranging. You're watching someone do something will help you gain some abstract knowledge, but you really have to do it yourself. And I know Sky knows what I'm talking about there. You really have to do the exercise yourself, and you can't do that without having the right tools.
Yeah, and one more thing with that, Jim, is Sky also has, even outside of the 66 days of hand reading, he's got some really good beginner's basic stuff out of his Meads of Poker hand reading. That really, that whole page that he has in there just on hand reading for anybody that hasn't done it is absolutely amazing. If I could turn my camera around, you would see that I actually have the page listed out to say, all right, I'm going to do, because I have been. So the last 2 weeks, I really have been trying to put more hand reading in because it's one of the places that I struggle at. So I just have it up in front of me where I can look at and go, okay, like you said, what pocket pairs do I put them on or what? I try to ask the 5 questions. Of course, takes me like 20 minutes. The hand is over, but it's starting, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, 66 days are wonderful, right? Shows you a lot of different scenarios, right? But there's also the beginner stuff, which Sky is really great at, right? Whether it be hand reading, or I really like his poker tracker, right? I mean, that kind of leads you. Poker tracker can be overwhelming, but it's nice to see that stuff in there in a simplified format that you can just pick up and go, oh, I get it, right? So
cool. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. It sounds kind of simple, but it's true. Just go through the process, visualize it more and more. Do it, several times a day, or at least every day. Do it once every day. And our brains just require that kind of repetition and practice to do it. And I think it's also something that we don't credit how good our brains are at learning this stuff until if we don't do it. We just think like, oh, well, what difference could it make? I'll do a little today, and then next week I'll do a little more. But listen, you owe it to yourself as a player. It's so much more fun when you're winning pots. It's like making good decisions and soul reading people and calling down with king high and that kind of stuff. It's just more fun. And it's obviously it's more profitable. You win more rec poker pins. I mean, the upside is huge. But so it really is. I just do it. Just do the work every day. Do the exercises. Follow along with Sky's videos and put the work and post it in the forums. If you get a spot where you're unclear about, or even like working with Flopzilla or Poker Tracker or something like that, it is daunting. It's a sophisticated program, but get some help. Rec Poker is all about just people helping people. So just put your questions up in the forums and or ask Sky. He's here. He's going to answer all your questions, and you just can't. There are no shortcuts, I guess is what I'm saying. You actually have to do it.
You do. And I do want to mention that one of the things that trips people up when they start hand reading and start assigning ranges is out of nowhere, this player will make a play with a hand that you would never put in his range. And that just frustrates you and blows your mind. If he could do this and I would never put him on that, this hand reading is not worth it because he could have anything. These players have any 2 cards. For example, I reviewed a hand with a student earlier this morning, and a player open raised. This 33 big blind stack player just called 33 big blinds, if I remember right. My student had pocket jacks in the big blind, 3-bet to 12 big blinds. It folded back around to the caller, and he just shoved his remaining 30 big blinds in. And then, my student made the call with pocket jacks, which he should, because we put this guy on a range of, you often see these calls and then people just saying, screw it, I'm going to shove right now. I wanted to see a flop with my hand. This jerk 3-bet me. Screw it. I'm just shoving all my chips in. But you'll see that often with like pocket 7s and better. So he does have queens, kings, and aces, slow playing those. But he also has ace, king, ace, queen, ace, jack, maybe even 10 jack suited, king, queen suited. So many hands that my students' pocket jacks were ahead of. And then so before I even saw what the opponent had, we put him on a range. And yeah, your call is totally fine. You've got the equity right here. This guy's a maniac player. Like his stats were, I can't remember, 50/30, something along those lines after 25 hands. Maniac player. We put him on a wide call 4-bet jamming range. And then we get to showdown and we see he had king 9 offsuit. What is going on? But here's the thing. We put him on this range pre-flop and he gets there, or he ends up showing king 9 offsuit. That's not the end of the story, or that's not the end of your hand reading exercise. Now you have to ask yourself, okay, now what would cause this player, or what would bring him to actually make that shove? Like mentally, what's going through his head? And then I came to the conclusion, he called with king 9 offsuit on the button because he wants to see the flop and play position. You 3-bet him. In his mind, screw you, jerk. I am going to shove all in on your face and, put you to the test. And so sometimes like when somebody does make that play, now that's going to inform my student in the future. Okay, this mega aggressive 50/30 player called and shoved again. I saw a king 9 before. Well, that means he could have king 9 suited, king 10 suited, queen 9 suited, maybe. There's so many more range. Now his calls with jacks looks even better, like an even more no-brainer of a call, you know? So when somebody does show a hand outside of the range you assign, don't just say, don't throw up your hands in frustration and say, screw this, I can't do this. No, dive into your, like, step into his shoes. What caused him to do that? And that's going to help you so much more, you know, as you do this more and more in the future.
And you just keep building those assumptions about that player or about that player pool. And, you know, if he does do this kind of action with king 9 offsuit, then you do have to, excuse me, you do have to go by, and just like Sky's saying, it's like when you're later thinking about this player in that same spot, you got to include king 9, you got to include king 10, you got to include king jack. You know, you don't have to include king 8, but you don't have any evidence to that. But you can kind of build the edges of the range around these kind of outlier hands. So it's really important to record that in some way, whether you're in a HUD or you're playing live on your phone or something like that, because you know it's a math game when you're looking at some of this stuff. When you're looking at, like, particularly in this situation where you're like, do I call or do I not call an all in, or do I shove or do I not shove? And the number of combos that they have in their range that are not aces, kings, queens, or ace king, that becomes really relevant. And they're not making any more good hands. So there's only so many good hands. So the more hands they have in that range, just, you know, it just gets better and better for you to be shoving, because it's just, oh no, that's even those aces, kings, and queens, and ace king. Now they're only this much of this entire range. Whereas for a very tight player, you know, it's the same number of combos, but the range is so much smaller. This is the junk in here that they're going to be playing with. So I really think having that kind of having that mindset it is important, and being able to learn from that and extrapolate from that.
Yep. And for sure, you had mentioned, you know, it's a math game, or it can boil down to just simple math. And that just got me thinking the opposite of math is feelings, right? And we didn't go into this hand in detail. We didn't look at prior hands to see what happened. But this player with 33 big blinds to start the hand, he might have just lost a huge stack, went from 120 down to 33. He might just be steaming and tilting now too. So in the moment, like when you're hand reading and going through your database, you might not realize that this guy is angry and tilting and stuff. But in the moment when you're playing live, and I know many rec poker players or live players, pay attention to that, right? Look for players who are possibly angry and tilting, and then you can put them on those wider aggressive ranges because they're just so frustrated and pissed off and they want to get that money back, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And that meta game is something that you can really only pick up while you're playing. It's not gonna come across in your study materials as well. But
well, it will if you're reviewing like hand after hand in a session, right? So you chose to review just this table starting from hand 1 to hand 50, and then you notice, oh, player 4 lost 20 big blinds, he lost 30 more, he rebought to 100, lost 70. Then now you can see that there is something going on there. But most of the time, we don't review our database that way. We look for specific hands. We review big losing hands, street by street action, as opposed to an entire session. So that's another way to review your hands and to try to build that meta game understanding and paying attention to your opponents.
Yeah. And I think it's also important that we intentionally study in different ways from time to time, because just as Sky says, that gives you like different insights into what's happening at the table or what's happening in people's minds, or it might even just give you a different way of thinking about a hand or a stage of the tournament or something like that. Like I know a lot of our players are tournament players, and that's another thing that it just matters a lot, and how savvy they are about that kind of stuff matters a lot, you know. So trying to just make these good assumptions about people and putting them in the right buckets, that is a big part of it. What about this sort of monsters under the bed, Sky? So we assign them a pre-flop range that's not perfect, but it's what we think they have. The action goes such that on the flop we reduce their range, and then we just get that terrible turn card that, you know, we've got a top pair, but now it went like 8, 9, 10, and then there's two suits on there, and you're like, oh no, he totally has that 7, 8. He wouldn't play this any other way. It's tempting to. I guess my question is, how do we resolve the tension between not adding hands back into the range, but sort of like also we know our original assumption wasn't perfect, so like maybe that 7, 8 should have been in there. How do you make that decision in real time while you're playing?
Well, you're thinking about his actions and would he really be doing this without the made hand, whatever that is, the flush, the straight, whatever you're potentially concerned with, the card that hit on the turn, right? So he called you pre-flop. Yeah, maybe 7, 8 is in the range. He check called on the flop because he has a pair plus a draw, whatever it might be. All of a sudden the draw completes and he donk bets out for 2/3 pot, making that play. Now, maybe he's the player who's capable of bluffing like that and really using the scare card against you. And if you're brand new to the table or he's new to your table, you're not going to know that about him exactly. So because it's a difficult spot and there's a lot of chips on the line and he's making an uncharacteristically aggressive play for most players, right? The third straight, the fourth, the fourth straight card, the third flush card hits the board. When players wake up with aggression, they probably have it most of the time. And if you don't know much about the player, even though you have his range in your mind, you don't know much about him, it's probably best to just fold if you only have like a 1 pair hand, even if it's an overpair of kings, right? Because he just suddenly woke up with crazy aggression. You don't know anything about him. It's probably best to just fold. It's a bummer. Like you don't want to see monsters under the bed, right? But here's what you also do. When that happens and you decide to fold because you're going to put him on that better hand, go ahead and fold, but whip out that smartphone right now and Evernote. Take notes on the hand. What was the type of player? What was the pre-flop action? What was the board on the flop and the turn? Now take that hand to Flopzilla Pro. Assign him that range and then really think about, I know that this player is a rather tight player. Is he really capable of bluffing on the turn? And then, you already narrowed his range from the pre-flop through the flop. Now he's on the turn. Is he capable of bluffing? And you're going to figure out whether or not, just like you said with math, if he does have some bluffs in his range, but mostly value, are your kings good enough to make that call versus that big check raise? And now it's just a math problem because you've already put him on a range. You might be completely wrong. You folded, he never showed his hand. You don't know, but you've done that practice off the felt. The more of those uncomfortable, unsure situations that you practice off the felt with Flopzilla Pro, the better you're going to get at analyzing and making better decisions in the moment in game. And so it's really tough, and you're never 100% sure if they don't show their hand, if they muck it, right? But just do the work off the felt and trust that it's going to develop an intuition, an intuitive sense for their ranges and what they're making their plays with.
And most of the players that we're playing against are not going to be taking a balanced line in those unconventional spots. So when someone does something unusual, they're usually playing exactly their hand. They're playing exactly their hand in this spot, and you can make some exploitative calls or folds, or raises accordingly. I might never call another river lead in my life based on how things are going down here this week, because it's just, every time someone leads into me on the river, they've got some crazy hand, and
because they don't want you to check behind, they want value out of you. Yeah.
Right. And so I'm just starting to just make that own adjustment in my own mind, where now that's affecting the range that I think they have in that spot, and I have this problem of like projecting on people where like, oh, well, you could do that with the, that heart didn't come, or, oh, he could have this under pair or something. He's trying to get me off my second pair. Let them get you off that hand, because they're not doing it often enough to make it profitable for them in the long term. Just they're turning their hand face up. So it's like only some players are going to do that in a way that makes you that makes it better for you to not sort of take them at their word. I'm not saying that very well, but I guess what I mean is like, especially the games that we're playing, you can kind of believe people when they make unusual actions, because they're playing their hand. They're not trying to get you off anything. They're not trying to like put you to a difficult decision. They just have a great hand and they want to get. Now they'll be a little tricky every once in a while, or they'll check and hope that you bet. That does happen. But even in that case, think about the hands that they got there with, and the old value check, it can be a big part of that too. You don't have to take pots just by betting and exposing yourself to that. But again, these players, they're not, they're probably not getting, they're probably not doing it in a balanced way. So let them exploit you. Honestly, let them exploit you. And then if someone goes to showdown and you see that they actually did that with a busted draw or with some underpair or something weird like that, that's when you pull out that Evernote and you like make sure you circle that player and say, like, this is someone who I actually have to think about whether they're doing this or not in that spot. But most people aren't.
Yeah.
Most people aren't. Well, we got about 10 more minutes here. Does anyone have any questions for Sky, or is there anything? Action is the greatest teacher, as he says. I hope everyone's following along with the video and doing some of the exercises, whatever you're working on to do it. You will become a better poker player. You will become a better poker player if you do these exercises. I can't make it any simpler for you. If you want to get better at poker, do hand ranging exercises. And if you want to do hand ranging exercises, follow along with Sky Matsuhashi. So,
well, I have a question for you, Jim. I didn't see the post. I didn't look for it within rec.poker, of where this video was posted.
Yes.
The assigning ranges video. And then I don't know where you're going to post this video necessarily, but what I want to do is I'm going to send you these PDFs so that you can put a download link below the video, both videos, right? That initial video and this recording, so that if people want to print these up, and I printed them, I laminated them so I can take a dry erase marker and circle other hands, cross out hands, and actually do hand reading in the game while I'm playing against somebody, so they could do the same thing with those.
That's awesome. And that's a great tip too. I have a bunch of printouts, but I'm a pen and paper guy. So I used to do all this stuff, just like writing it out in like photocopying grids and marking it all out like that. And the lamination is a great step if you've got something that you're using a lot, or even just putting it in one of those binder sleeves or something like that you can work on top of. Doug, I think you unmuted first. Do you have anything you'd like to say?
Well, I'd ask that Sky include that slide with the things to consider on the hand raising, if you would.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I'll take a screenshot of the slide.
Well, yeah, you can take a screenshot, or I can send you the actual nice whatever. But whatever works. Yes, I can do that too.
Nice.
I had a funny story. I made a mistake last night and played a poker tournament. I had no intention of playing. I was on a long drive and I stopped at the casino. I thought they were having a $300 Friday night tournament, which had been just lovely. And it turned out to be a $45 Friday night tournament. Okay, so the casino's just packed with cash players who flip over $45 tournament, which of course is one bet at the cash table.
Yep.
So they're flying through the rebate buy part of this tournament. So hand ranging wasn't working, is what I would say. I was all in halfway through this tournament with ace king. I had called a third all in. The hand that won it was jack 8 offsuit. Everybody was all in pre-flop.
Yeah.
Us went to showdown. I mean, so pick your tournaments better than I did. There's no other moral of that story.
Yeah, it's true though. But I mean, even in that case, even though players are playing with ridiculous ranges, or they're getting it in ways that you wouldn't expect, whether you're doing it intentionally or not, you're ranging them in real time. And at that point, I hope you felt great about getting in with ace king, because these players are coming in with anything. Yeah, no, exactly. But you're still going to lose a bunch of the time. But you're just giving yourself the best possible chance to win. It is hard.
And I just couldn't bring myself to fold my ace king, and I should have.
Well, I mean,
I mean, if it sounds like one of the guys got it in with jack 8 off, you didn't. It's not that you should have folded. If you results oriented, sure, you should have folded because you lost. But we can't look at that. We got to look at your decision in the moment. And if he's capable of getting in with jack 8, you can never fold ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10. You cannot fold those.
Yeah. Kevin, did you have a question there? I saw you unmute earlier.
No. Just a bunch of stuff running through my head, but nothing right now.
Okay. So I guess the last question I have, Sky, just taking off on what Doug's talking about there. When ranges are so wide, I mean, it feels harder to do this. It feels like, how can I even put this person on a range? Because they're playing, 80% of hands or something ridiculous like that. I mean, I guess the simple answer is, well, just put them on an 80% range. Just do the same thing. Like, just do the same thing. And I guess one tip would be, if people want to start hand ranging exercises, start with hands that have a 3-bet in the action pre-flop, because what that's going to do is it's going to mean that the original hand range is much smaller. So the number of combos that are going to be continuing through the hand is a lot less. If you just get into a single raise pot, lots of, like Sky said, people love to open raise and people love to call. So those are going to be wide ranges, and it's going to be like a daunting number of combos that you have to go through and reduce street by street. So if you're just doing the exercises, start with 3-bet pots. And then you're going to say, okay, well, I don't know how out of line this player is, but they're not 3-betting, 30% of hands. And this other player is not calling 3-bets at 30%. I mean, I won't say that for sure, but well, you know what I mean, though. So you just start off with fewer combos, and that'll make each step of the process a little easier, because it's just fewer combos that you have to reduce on every hand.
Yeah. So I like that idea, but that's not where I would start exactly, because most situations that you get into, like when you're doing training, when you're doing studying, when you're trying to improve your skills, you really want to improve in the areas where you are in most of the time, right? So that's the way I see it. So I think you should start by studying hands where you were the open raiser, one player called, and then you saw the flop. So now you're putting them on just a 2-bet calling range right there. And now maybe it's an 80% range, maybe it's a 10% range, but either way, based on player type, their statistics, what you've seen from them in the past, you can give that one player a range, whether wide or narrow, right? And then Flopzilla helps you do the rest of the work, right? As you go through the hands. But that initial thing that you mentioned, Jim, about and then what Doug said, having Jack 8 offsuit, right? Now that happened pre-flop. There's no post-flop activity to think about, right? But sometimes, like you said, players will call with an 80% range. But let me ask you right now, what kind of player calls with an 80%? So you said it's really tough to play against somebody with such a wide range. But let me ask you, Jim, who calls with an 80% range pre-flop?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of player that I want to be playing poker against.
Yeah, exactly. How do they play post-flop?
Right. Yeah, I mean, they're not going to be as savvy post-flop, and they're going to have a bunch of garbage in their range because they called so pre-flop.
Exactly, yes. But are they going to be doing a lot of folding, calling, betting, or raising post-flop?
No, these are call-y players, and you can get paid with your value hands there for sure.
100%. You hit that. They call a ton pre-flop because they want to see the flop. When they hit any pair or any draw, they don't want to fold.
Yeah.
So do not bluff the non-folders. If he gets to the flop, so like, yeah, he has a really wide range, and you think, oh, it's hard to play against him. I don't know what he could have. Don't think about what he can necessarily have right now. Think about his general post-flop tendencies. He doesn't fold with any pair, doesn't fold a draw. If you flop an ace-high hand and no pair at all, and he checks to you, just check behind. You know he's not going to fold. Just check behind. Keep that pot small. On the turn, you might see a free ace or a king. Awesome, top pair. And now I can bet 2/3, 3/4, full pot to get value out of this guy that's calling with every gut shot, every flush draw, every second, every third pair, So while it is tougher, like when you don't really think about the player that you're up against, you think, oh, his range is so wide. It's really easier to play against those players. He's a calling station. He's not going to fold. Don't bluff him, but value bet big, like you had mentioned.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily easy to win the pots at a high frequency, but if you're getting in there, and also just think about how much stronger your range of hands is than theirs. If no betting happened after the flop and you just got to showdown a million times with this player, like you'd win more hands because you're starting with a stronger set of hands. So, however it works out. And the other thing on that point is, like, really tailor your betting to who you're playing against. Like, you get that king 7-4 rainbow flop. If you're playing against a thinking player, or layers, right? Levels. A lot of the players that we're playing against, that's a good C bet flop, right? So if you're playing like range versus range, that's just where you want to make a bet with probably your entire C betting range. But if you actually have 10 jack suited and it's king 7-4, don't feel like responsible to represent that whole range there when your opponent isn't thinking about things like that. They're just playing the two cards in front of them.
Yep.
And you don't like owe it to yourself to represent that range in every spot either. You can just make an exploitative check behind, and then like Sky says, maybe a turn or river something, and then just play your value hands, just bet your value hands and get paid.
Yeah.
Easy game. All right, well, thanks, Guy. I have so much fun in these, man. This is something that I'll just say this right up front. If you want to get better at poker, start practicing your hand ranging. And I know Andrew Feist, who puts some of these programs together, he's got some plans for a little later in the year to talk about post flop hand ranging, board textures, and bet and raise sizing. And those are, if you had to kind of like circle the low hanging fruit for recreational players like us, those are the areas where we need to study, and they're going to be effective in every hand that you play, every hand. Doug?
I just want to thank Sky for this training session. It's helpful. Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome. Glad to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. So the next video will drop on the first Saturday of the month in November. I'm not sure what the date is, but
The 6th.
The 6th. Thank you, sir. So look for that on November 6th. And then the third Saturday of the month, some quick mental math telling me that's the 20th. So we can all get together on November 20th and have another conversation like this and pick this man's brain and all get better at poker together, right? That's what we're doing. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. And thanks, Guy. Really do appreciate it.
Thanks.
Looking forward to next month. See you again soon.
Cool beans. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Yep.